chegando, sejam muito bem-vindos. Então, boa noite para todos que estão chegando, sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Vocês estão encontrando na tela Pauline Tesler, Nancy Ross, Olivia First, Natália Winter e Isabel Andrade Ramos. Sob o logo do Mediare, a gente tem a Vitória, que está nos ajudando na abertura da sala. Vitória, você nos diz, por favor, quando você perceber que a gente já tem... Oi, boa noite, Vitória. Já tem um número significativo de pessoas para a gente começar. A gente pode tomar mais uns 2 minutos.
Claro, a gente já tem 60 na sala.
Tá.
Bem?
60 till now, Pauline.
70, né? Enquanto você falou, já subiu o número.
Ok. Boa noite a todos que estão chegando. Uma alegria receber vocês para o webinário do Grupo de Estudos Práticas Colaborativas. A gente vai iniciar em mais um minutinho, só para oportunizar que mais pessoas possam estar conosco nessa noite. Para quem está nos dando boa noite pelo chat, também boa noite em nome de todos os outros que nós não estamos vendo os rostos, mas que sabemos que estão conosco celebrando esse aniversário. Hoje é dia de festa, né? Hoje é dia de aniversário. O nosso grupo completa 10 anos.
Sim.
Ok, Vitória? Você tem uma ideia já do número de pessoas para a gente começar?
Tenho sim, já tem 68.
O que vocês acham, Olivia, Isabel e Natália? Começamos ou damos mais 2 minutos?
Acho que podemos começar.
Podemos? Isabel?
Sim, podemos
Sim?
começar.
Podemos. Ok. Bom, então esse boa noite agora é oficial. De forma geral, eu recebo todos vocês que estão chegando para os webinários mensais do Mediare, como dona da casa. De forma geral, eu recebo e passo a coordenação para aquelas pessoas que estão à frente dos grupos de estudo. Hoje, além de dona da casa, eu sou a mãe do noivo, né? Porque nós estamos celebrando o grupo de estudos de práticas colaborativas do Mediare, que nasceu em 2011. Ele nasce no Rio de Janeiro, mas ele começa a gestação dele nos Estados Unidos, em um encontro que eu tive com Pauline Pegg, numa conferência da American Bio Association. Me encantei pelo tema e voltei aos Estados Unidos para fazer uma capacitação com a Pauline e trouxe esse encantamento para o Rio e para o setor de práticas colaborativas do Mediare, convidando a Olivia para estar à frente, inicialmente tocando junto comigo, e depois ela ficou com a batuta com outros colegas nossos. Então, esse grupo ele é a origem dos outros grupos brasileiros, e ele é também a origem do Instituto Brasileiro de Práticas Colaborativas. Então, eu fico muito feliz com esse aniversário, muito feliz de ter você, Pauline e Nancy, conosco, porque são corresponsáveis por esse nascimento. E, de lá para cá, nós temos tido vários sucessores, todos encantados em manter essa prática. Então, boa noite a todos. Passo para a Olivia para dar continuidade a essa história do nosso grupo.
Boa noite a todos, a todas. É uma alegria, uma honra, uma emoção enorme estar aqui essa noite, celebrando os 10 anos, né? A gente pensar em agosto de 2011, como essa ideia ainda parecia distante, utópica, e estamos aqui celebrando com um número tão grande, tanto que a Tânia já trouxe, né? Tanta coisa já foi feita nesses 10 anos. Então, é muito emocionante, né? Assim, a gente olhar para trás e ver essa história, essa semente trazida pela Tânia, né? Plantada, né? nesse grupo, e quantos frutos já rendeu, né? Então, agradecer e ter a oportunidade de estar aqui com as minhas mestras, as minhas maiores referências, Tânia Almeida, Pauline Tessler, Nancy Ross, e ter a oportunidade de agradecer vocês, né, por todo esse trabalho, todo o trabalho de vocês, por abrir esses caminhos para a gente trilhar. E, bom, então fico super emocionada. Realmente tudo começou no grupo de estudos do Mediar, em agosto de 2011. De lá para cá, como a Tânia disse, a gente nasceu o IBPC, veio a primeira capacitação com a Pauline e equipe, em 2014. Ganhamos o Prêmio Novare, que eu trouxe aqui, para a gente ver, o maior prêmio da Justiça Brasileira. Esse prêmio está, por acaso, aqui comigo, porque fui eu que botei essas ideias no papel e articulei com a realidade brasileira, mas ideias que não são minhas, esse prêmio é nosso. Esse prêmio é da Pauline, é da Nancy, é da Tânia, é da Natália, da Bel, de todo mundo que está aqui assistindo a gente, porque a gente faz parte de uma corrente, né, de uma continuidade. Eu sou um elo dessa corrente, então é muito bonito da gente ver e da gente estar aqui hoje celebrando essa continuidade e quem está chegando, né, também, e essa sucessão, essa cadeia de aprendizagem, de transformação que a gente está aqui testemunhando e celebrando essa noite. Então, muito obrigada, né, a vocês e a quem está aqui ouvindo a gente. É isso, eu estou bem emocionada, não posso deixar de falar da Fernanda Paiva e da Flávia Soeiro, que estavam com a Tânia lá no início, convocando o pessoal para estar nesse primeiro encontro, em agosto de 2011. E é isso, gente, que a gente passe por esse momento que a gente está vivendo. Agora, a colaboração não é mais uma opção, né? É mandatório para quem entende que, né, a vida tem que ter... Para que a vida possa fluir, né? Então, mais do que nunca, esse trabalho, essa perspectiva, esse paradigma, ele se faz urgente, né? Não só na justiça, nos sistemas de justiça, mas em muitas outras áreas. Eu não quero me estender mais, se a gente está aqui para ouvir a Pauline e a Nancy, mas é isso. Muito obrigada a todos e que a gente, né, tenha uma noite linda de muito aprendizado e muita troca. Muito obrigada.
Para aqueles que não sabem, Natália e Isabel são as coordenadoras do grupo, né? Então, elas agora que são as mestres de cerimônia das nossas palestrantes. Bem-vindas.
Obrigada, Tânia. Obrigada, Olívia. De fato, é um prazer estar aqui, receber duas convidadas tão queridas e tão importantes para a história do nosso grupo de estudos. Esse grupo que é um bebê que a gente cuida com muito carinho, que vem engatinhando desde 2011 e tomando corpo e cada vez mais relevância, e hoje a gente comemora os 10 anos. É um grupo que se reúne mensalmente, sempre às primeiras quartas-feiras do mês. É um encontro que hoje ele está aberto aos associados do Mediar, então a gente gostaria de convidar a quem quiser acompanhar a evolução desse grupo, participar com a gente das nossas trocas, das nossas discussões, enviem um e-mail para a Secretaria do Mediar, acessem o site, busquem a inscrição, façam a associação de vocês, que esse grupo ele tende a crescer cada vez mais, com novos olhares, novas trocas, a gente vai cada vez mais buscando enriquecer essa caminhada. É um grupo multidisciplinar, nós temos advogados no grupo, temos psicólogos, temos consultores em finanças, é um grupo aberto a quem quiser participar das áreas do direito, das áreas da saúde mental e da área de finanças. Então, a ideia é a gente agregar e receber sempre novas pessoas e novos olhares para esse tema que a gente vem discutindo há tantos anos. Inclusive, é importante a gente dizer, né, que esse grupo, a gente propõe um híbrido. A gente tem tanto a troca de experiências dos casos concretos, como a gente também tem algumas leituras. Inclusive, uma leitura que a gente explora com alguma frequência é a literatura produzida pela nossa ilustríssima convidada Pauline Tessler, e eu gostaria de relembrar a todos que a gente tem uma nova versão, né? A gente tem uma versão traduzida do livro dela, Direito Colaborativo, sendo traduzido e publicado pelo IBPC, e a pré-venda está aberta e a gente tem a oportunidade de comprar esse livro com desconto até o dia 7 de setembro, Então, quem tiver interesse em adquirir o seu exemplar, é só mandar um e-mail para o contato@praticascolaborativas.com.br, que o Instituto Brasileiro de Práticas Colaborativas vai ter o maior prazer em ajudar vocês nessa aquisição. Queria também avisar que durante a nossa troca, durante a conversa que a Pauline e a Nancy vão ter, a gente fica aberta a receber perguntas, então, por favor, façam as perguntas em português. Nesse espacinho aqui na nossa barra de ferramentas do Zoom, tem um espacinho chamado Q&A, que são Questions and Answers, então fiquem à vontade para mandar as perguntas de vocês, que Isabel e eu vamos ler ao final. Então, é isso. Bel, por favor, apresente nossas convidadas.
Boa noite a todas e todos. Também queria agradecer o convite da Natália para coordenar esse grupo. Muito honrada com isso. E dizer também que o grupo traz diálogos interdisciplinares, a gente convida, tem convidados que contribuem também com temas afins às práticas colaborativas, ampliando aí nossas conversas. Estou com a responsabilidade de apresentar as nossas convidadas e dar início ao webinar. Então, temos a Nancy Ross, que é coach em divórcio, mediadora, cofundadora da atuação interdisciplinar em práticas colaborativas, cofundadora da Academia Internacional de Profissionais Colaborativos, ganhadora do prêmio California Collaborative Practice Award e treinadora de práticas colaborativas no campo do divórcio colaborativo, testamentos e sucessões. A Pauline Tessler, que é a pioneira no desenvolvimento e na divulgação das práticas, é advogada especialista em direito de família, é autora e coautora de vários livros, inclusive esse que a Natália mencionou, e cofundadora da Academia Internacional de Profissionais Colaborativos, também da revista The Collaborative Review. Aproveitando para avisar que a Pauline vai estar presente no 3º Congresso Brasileiro de Práticas Colaborativas, celebrando o lançamento dessa edição do livro em português Direito Colaborativo, e que esse painel vai acontecer em 26 de novembro. Então, convidando todas e todos também para o Congresso de Práticas Colaborativas. Pauline e Nancy, obrigada. Podemos começar.
All right. Hello, everyone. Nancy and I are thrilled to be here. And what we're going to be doing with you today, before we even launch into that, I really must say, I know Nancy would agree with me that we have this special connection with the Brazilian collaborative community, because both of us have done training really all over the world and helped communities launch in many countries. And we have never seen anything like the Brazilian phenomenon. You have, in 10 years, created a movement that is a model, really, worldwide for how to do it. Your energy, your commitment, your intelligence, and also the special joy with which you do it just delight us. And so we are so happy to celebrate with you. What we're going to do is have a conversation, Nancy and I, and she doesn't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know what she's going to say, but we have a little roadmap for ourselves. So what we're doing is modeling for you what actually happens in collaborative cases. There is the roadmap, and then there is what happens. And hopefully the surprises will be good ones. Nancy, do you want to say anything before we start the content?
No, I just want to second the joy and appreciation that we feel from all of you. And when we designed this to begin with, it was with that idea that it would be for families and children. But I think some of the joy for me is to see how professionals have bonded together and formed friendships. And we talked earlier about the purpose in our lives in a very difficult time, that for most of us, this kind of practice is now our purpose in life.
So the way we're going to do this is spend about 10 minutes each on a list of topics that we agreed upon that very roughly parallel the kinds of concerns that a team has to address as we move from the beginning through the middle to the end of a well-managed collaborative case. And Nancy and I are going to be referring from time to time to anecdotes and incidences and challenges that have occurred specifically in a case that she and I are handling right now, which I think Nancy might agree is possibly the most challenging collaborative case that we have ever experienced in the approximately 25 years or more that we've been doing this work. So the topic is a good one, challenges in collaborative teamwork, because I think we're experiencing all of them this year in working this with this particularly difficult couple. So I'll begin. One other thing I have to tell you. When Nancy talks today about interdisciplinary teamwork and the various professional roles, what I want you to know, which isn't generally highlighted nearly enough, is that Nancy, together with Peggy Thompson, her colleague and my colleague, Nancy and Peggy invented interdisciplinary team collaboration. It didn't exist until they did the research, experimentation, and then finally the development of the model as Nancy teaches it and as I teach it. So none of us would be doing this work but for Nancy and Peggy. And when you hear Nancy's insights about teamwork, you are hearing from the source. So I too am going to be learning again today, as I do every time I have the privilege of working with Nancy. So let's begin, Nancy, with how cases begin, which is at the initial consultation when the clients call one of the professional team. Most often still it's a lawyer, although sometimes it's a coach or a financial person. And that person, most often a lawyer, is, I think of as the gatekeeper to the collaborative process, because how that professional handles the initial consultation is going to determine so many things about what happens next. First of all, going to determine whether that does or does not become a collaborative case. Secondly, is going to determine when and how an interdisciplinary team is formed. Third is going to determine what the clients expect and understand is going to happen in a collaborative case and what the roles and functions of the team would be. And I guess the one thing that I would throw out to start with is, I think that the biggest challenge for new practitioners is that in doing what we call in North America, the informed process choice conversation, which is an ethical responsibility, the clients have to understand their choices before they choose which process they're going to use. And until we get more experience at it, beginners tend to describe the processes in terms of what the professionals do in each process. I call that professional musical chairs, which refers to a childhood game of the music stops and there's only one chair missing and somebody doesn't get to sit down. So professional musical chairs talks about how the professionals move around and where they sit, and that is of no use to clients whatsoever. What clients need to hear, because they're very anxious at the beginning of their divorce process and sometimes all the way through, the only thing they can really hear has to do with what they're afraid of and what they dare to hope for when they dare to be positive. And so in presenting this vital and complicated information that's so new to them, what we need to learn to do as we get better at this is to present all of these pieces of information anchored to something that the client has told us, their own narrative. And we listen for a fear and we listen for a hope. And then we explain what would happen to that fear or that hope if they chose litigation or mediation or friendly negotiations or collaboration. Nancy, what do you think about that or anything else about that?
Oh, I think you're spot on. I think when they come, when I first see a client, and I often do, therapists are great at sending us clients. And so sometimes they come first to me, but it's the same thing. I think what I want to do when they first come through the door, first of all, I have to settle myself and think of them as they're the decision makers. leaders. And I strongly believe, as you said, Pauline, they need to make those decisions knowing as much as we can give them in that first meeting. And that means I respect whatever they do choose when we tell them about all of their choices. But invariably, and I tell them I have a bias. I want to be neutral. I'll explain what happens when you do it yourself and when you mediate or negotiate on the kitchen table. But I also want to tell you that as I hear your fears and your concerns and what your beliefs are, that I want to address each one of those. And what we do, you'll probably hear that I'm a little bit biased. I'm a little bit in favor of, I can't help it, collaborative practice.
Well, as it should be. That's what we've committed our lives to. And so one of the techniques that I find is very helpful in presenting collaboration as one of many choices for the client, and yet it's the choice that I've devoted my professional life to. So how do I not tell them that this is what they have to do? How do I not make the decision for them? What I do, and I suspect you do something similar, is I say, this is why I've chosen to devote my career to collaboration. I've done it all. I've done heavy duty litigation, friendly court annexed negotiations, mediation, all of it. And what I know is the best processes and the best outcomes happen in collaboration. But what I don't know, speaking to the client, what I don't know is whether you can do this. I don't know whether you have the degree of commitment to staying out of court and to staying focused on solutions that would make it possible for you to succeed at collaboration. More than 90% of people who try it, who start out, do succeed in getting a full agreement, but 5 to 10% of people don't. And it's not because of us. We're the same person in every case. It's because people differ in their commitment to the process and also in their ability to do it. And so now I'm speaking to you, not to the client. That's what makes the initial consultation so important, because we can't tell them what to do. We need to listen and draw out the information that will help us present it in a way that the client can hear it, and yet give us the information so that if we know that these people don't have a chance at staying constructive and communicating as best they can with our help, we shouldn't be encouraging them to do it. So it's a deep conversation. And I quickly want to tell one anecdote. This case, this monster, difficult, challenging case that Nancy and I are engaged in right now, which has the best collaborative professionals I know of on it. So it is the best possible team to work with them. And it takes every bit of our intelligence and skill to just keep this vessel moving straight ahead instead of going onto the rocks every time. It came to me as a referral from a financial professional in California who's very well known and very experienced. He happened to be in a general information workshop called Divorce Options that explains different processes. He met my client there, talked briefly with him, not more than 5 minutes, and told him, you should talk to Pauline about a collaborative divorce. You won't need 2 coaches. You won't need much help. This is going to be very easy. I can tell from talking with you. And it is the hardest case I have ever been involved in. What do you think about those concerns, Nancy?
No, when our client, so we're coaching the man in this case, and even he, when he came in the door the first time, he is so aspirational. He's highly educated. He's well-intentioned, but don't you think there's such a kind of space, if you want to say that, between his intelligence and his empathy and his skill level? So,
Yeah.
he came in with these high aspirations, And at first, it's hard for us to know. In that first interview, when we're talking with our client, we don't always know. I don't know what you listen for. I sort of listen for whether or not there's a level of trust where I can pick up there's trust. And I think that was my first inkling that this is not going to be an easy case. He did not trust his wife.
He doesn't trust her. She doesn't trust him. And in many instances, that would be a disqualifying piece of information. But what coexists with the mistrust that they have for one another is a rock solid commitment not to turn this over to other people, not to turn it over to judges, not to turn it over to a court. They're determined that they're going to stay at the table and keep working at it. And I think each of us in different ways made an alliance with that part of our client that has that commitment to figure out, in spite of mistrust, how to get to a solution. But Nancy and I are both working with the husband. We work in what I call a triad. We have meetings, the two of us, with our client to prepare him for each of the collaborative meetings. And he needs every bit of help we can give him because he usually starts the meeting. I think of him as being on the ceiling, so upset that he's like a helium balloon that has gone all the way up and has landed at the ceiling. And we have to grab the cord and kind of gradually pull him back down to where we can have a conversation with him. And every time we manage to do it, and every time we find a delightful human being in there. But I think, well, what do you think would have happened with these people if they had landed in a community where only one mental health professional is on the team rather than two, Nancy?
I do not think it could have succeeded. This is one, when Peggy and I talked about having two coaches, I actually argued with her. And I said, no, I can do that. I'm a family therapist. I'm a mediator. I can do this. And yet this case, Pauline, tells me all the mistakes that I would have made. I would have had my hands tied. I couldn't be with the client. I couldn't meet with him, build his skill level, his ability to see his wife's side of the story, to forgive himself for many of the things that he had done to her, which were considerable. And if I were just a mediator, I couldn't form the connection and the relationship with him. I couldn't do it with you as his ally because we have our own team that we work with him. And he trusts us now.
You and me.
You and me. He did not trust anyone else on the team, but he now trusts us because we're aligned with him, even though we're still looking out for the best interest of the family. So if I were a mediator, I would have to be neutral. I would ethically want to protect that. And I couldn't align with either one of them. I would be very much trying to get their communications going, but I couldn't build the trust. And what this family needed was trust. And no other process, I think it would have fallen out of collaborative and mediation if they didn't have the relationships that we've built.
And so what we also have, of course, is that the wife on this case has her own coach that's the analog to Nancy and has her own collaborative lawyer who's the analog to me. Maybe, I don't know if everybody's experienced this way of working, which we think of as the Rolls Royce or the Tesla of process models. How is it that you come to understand the wife working in this model?
I trust because the team trusts. And again, we can't do that with a client. And the other coach is someone I deeply respect, regard, have had many cases with. I trust her lawyer. He is amazing and he is able. I know that whatever he says, even though it may get, so one example, our client will often say to us, well, her lawyer is telling her that she needs to do, ask for more money or something, whatever it is. And you and I know it's not true. So in real time, we can say we know better. And it's almost like there are different levels. I have trust with my co-coach. I do trust the lawyer. And so I trust the team. When you and I are talking to our client, that trust comes through and he starts to get some of that as well. So he's not, at this point, he is not nearly as apprehensive about the other team as he was coming in. Coming in, everybody was an alien and an enemy.
It's true. And to give you an idea of how difficult this case has been for us, of course, we're doing it on Zoom. It's all been during the pandemic. It's much easier to build trust when we're all in person in the same office suite. And during the coffee breaks, we can have I could talk with the wife. I can talk with the other lawyer. They can talk with me so that everybody gets to know everyone as a human being. That's not possible on Zoom. It's just not possible. So we have to be the proxy, Nancy and I, that carries the trust relationships that we know we have with the other professionals to the clients. And it's a vital piece of doing high quality work this way. And we're really reaping the rewards of all of these many years of spending time in practice groups and doing all of the steps in a well-managed case where we meet as a professional team before each collaborative meeting, we plan for it, and then after each meeting, immediately after, we've got time blocked out to debrief what just happened. And then when we talk with our client, the husband, who's again up on the ceiling paranoid every time, and we bring him back down and have a conversation, what we're saying, he'll say, her lawyer is doing it again. He's trying to make her demand more than I would ever give. And what I say and what Nancy says is, I've worked with George for 25 years. He would never do that. He would never do it for any client. Why should he do it for your wife? Spoil 25 years of successful work on professional teams. It will not happen. So you can believe me, even if you don't believe your wife, that that's not what's going on. And he does believe us. So going back to our list, Nancy, we were going to talk about the importance of mission statements. That happens, again, right at the beginning of the case. You have a chart, which maybe we could flash on the screen sharing for a minute. It's been translated into Portuguese. It's a roadmap chart from the client's perspective. Can somebody screen share that for us? And it just moves from the very beginning where, there we are. Yeah, the very beginning where clients make a commitment to collaboration, which starts during the initial consultation that we described, moves through hopes and concerns and the information gathering stage to generating and evaluating options for settlement and reaching agreement. That's how the clients see it. So going back up to the commitment stage and the hopes stage, we're not being guided. We can take that off screen now. Thank you very much, Isabel. If you put it up there, you could take it down now. How do we achieve this commitment, and how do the hopes come forward, and why is it so important? It is that in conventional settlement negotiations, the reference point is the law. We're making predictions about what a judge would or would not do if it went to court. And so if the clients are disagreeing, we can always say, well, if we go to Judge Jones is likely to do this. And so you should bear that in mind as you negotiate this issue. But we don't do that in collaboration because we're never going to court. So it's not a useful thing to say. So Nancy, could you talk about how we use the mission statement instead as a reference point?
We use the mission statement to find out what is so important to them, what means the most to them, both for themselves personally for the process and for the outcome. So for them personally, it can be, I want to participate and be heard. I'm never heard, no one takes me seriously. So as a coach, that's an anchor. And what I do is we get the intentions, what's really important to each one of the, if they're parents, let's assume they are, not everybody is, but many are, what's most important to them. And usually you can tie them to children. If nothing else, they will say, we do want to be good parents to our children. And then we have them look at what's important to you in this new relationship you're forming called co-parenting. What do you want that to look like? What do you want your children to see? So we frame it in many, many different ways. And what kind of parent, what kind of father, what kind of mother do you want to be now that you're going to be in two homes, but one family? What does that look like? And so we listen, we really take their words, and those words become our guide and their anchor, and we call it the mission statement.
And that is what the coaches will develop when we have, which we almost always work in Northern California, when we have two coaches, one for each client. Each client works with their own coach to do what Nancy just described. And then they have a four-way meeting of coaches and clients. And they put together the parts that are congruent in what each client has identified. And that becomes the shared mission statement from the coaching perspective. I like also to work with my lawyer colleague on a mission statement that takes a slightly different perspective, but is also used in exactly the same way. The way that I would describe it is that it focuses more on process in some ways. So when I'm working with my client to develop a mission statement, I like to have each client does it separately on the lawyer side. Each client has their own mission statement. And what they're describing is, what are the overarching values that made them choose collaboration? What are their highest hopes for the qualities that this process will demonstrate? In other words, usually people talk about mutual respect, careful or kind communication back and forth, consideration for the needs of the other person as well as my own, attention to extended family relationships. They will talk about those as being the value tinged objectives, overarching objectives that made them choose this rather than something else. So I asked them to put down their thoughts about that, and also to put down, for the professionals on the team, how will we know that we delivered for you and with you the kind of process that you were hoping for? What will be the qualities of your experiences with your professional team that, looking back on this, you'll say, yes, I got what I hoped for? So the mission statement isn't about, I want the house, I want the retirement plan. It's about much higher level goals. And as Nancy used the term process anchor, and I like to think of it as a process anchor event, because how do we use it? Well, we use it in the collaborative negotiating sessions, so that if suddenly there's an interaction that is not respectful, when I debrief with Nancy and with my client, I might say to him something like, how do you see what happened at that last meeting as connecting with what you said was your mission for this process? Is there anything about your part in that maybe we could do better next time in terms of achieving the kind of process that you said you want? Questions like that. And then when we get toward the end, when we're evaluating options for settlement, we also go back to the mission statement and we say, let's look at some of the possibilities for settling this issue and this issue and this issue. Which of these fit with the mission that you and your spouse agreed to in coaching and that you identified with your lawyers, and which ones don't fit with that mission? So we're using the client's own values in place of the law as the anchor and the measure for the work we do and the outcomes that the clients identify. Do you want to add to that, Nancy?
No, I think, yes, I think and the team is in supporting those statements, those goals. I think as the coaches, we're giving them the tools because I have them specify, how are you going to reach those goals? We put the goals together because you can hear, you elicit slightly different goals depending on who you are, you know, whether you're a coach or whether you're a lawyer or the financial. And each one of us puts those goals together as a team. And then we talk together, how are the clients going, what do they need? What skills, what shifts in maybe attitude or the way they react in meetings, managing emotions, what are they practically going to need? And I'm thinking of our client, Pauline, and what he really needed was to be able to have time and learn the skill of just calming down and listening.
Yes.
And that's what his wife needed. And he could see that, and he could see what a difference it made. And then we could reinforce that so that those are early, that mission statement, that's how we keep using it throughout the process.
So that especially in the coaching process, I think what Nancy just said is a good illustration of one way that we describe the difference between collaborative divorce and other models is we're not just about reaching quick settlement agreements that are like what a judge would issue as orders. This is a value-added process in which we're actually modeling and teaching during the collaboration what it means for the family and every member of the family to restructure this family system and come out the other end in better shape, in better condition than they were when they came into the collaborative process. It's a value-added model where every interaction, ideally, it doesn't always work this way, but ideally every interaction, every stage of the process is a learning experience for the clients in how to behave at a more arm's length, distant relationship. Because if there are children, even adult children, these people are going to be connected forever, for their whole lives. How to do this in a respectful arm's length way, how to listen in a different way, how to speak in a different way. So we were going to talk about the different professional roles on the team, Nancy, and I don't know how long we need to spend on it, but why don't you launch into that and talk about the roles from your perspective?
So shall I talk about all the roles or just the coach and the financial, or what do you think?
Why don't you talk about the members of the team from the perspective of a coach, and then I'll come in after with the members of the team from the perspective of a lawyer.
So I think the most important relationship going in is with our lawyer, the one that kind of forms our alliance, if you will. So together, Pauline and I, what I see the lawyer brings is so crucial. And sometimes, by the way, the coaches have to work with the clients to give the lawyers a chance to be the best collaborative lawyer they can be, because they come in with biases. They come in thinking the lawyer on the other side, quote unquote, is going to be aggressive or not work with them, be an enemy of sorts. So we have to work with that a lot. But when it works well, it's what you see Pauline and I doing right here. I mean, I really value what she says, and she'll turn to me and say, what do you think, Nancy? And in front of our client, these roles get expanded until we become almost like a seamless team. So as a coach, I'm looking and listening always to make sure that the client and the lawyer and I are working together. And I have that advantage because I have that connection one-on-one with the client. And what I see the financials doing is amazing. I don't think we valued the financials nearly enough in the beginning. And that neutral role, the power of being the neutral on the team, giving financial information, which we all know is fraught with emotions. It's never just money. So having the neutral give information that's neutral, unbiased, and then it allows us to work together. It builds our team cohesion. So what I want from the lawyer most of all is a sense of team awareness, we can work together. And then I'll sit back and just watch the magic that Pauline does, which is kind of amazing, and the impact that builds that kind of trust for the client. In the meantime, my co-coach and I are working together with the couple. Again, working with their skills together, which we then want to translate into the team meetings. Our team meetings, everybody is together. We all are in the same Zoom room now together. So I see each one of us having such an impact that because we're so specialized, we think differently, we see things differently, we present differently. And that the clients need that. We never know which one of us, do we, is going to have the most impact.
That is what has been most astonishing to me in the years that I've done collaboration. At first, I worked just with collaborative lawyers and gradually started referring my clients in what we call the referral model to coaches to go out and work with coaches and then come back to the lawyers ready to work on the negotiations. And we would send them out to the coaches and to the financial neutral, and then the lawyers would meet with the clients. It is like moving to a different, wonderful fantasy planet to work in a fully integrated interdisciplinary team, such as Nancy just described to you. And the thing that's most astonishing is not at all about the clients, although we do extraordinary work with clients. It is that the team itself becomes an emergent learning system that teaches us how to do this work at an ever elevating level of sophistication because of these different professional lenses, temperaments, training, experience that we bring, so that as we get into a complex case like this, first of all, the first thing that happens is that in our community and in many communities, the full team is brought on board before the clients sign the commitment, the collaborative agreement that makes it a collaborative case. And we have our first team conference before the sign-on meeting. And we share perceptions at that point that make it possible to do better judgments about whether these people can do it or not, and what we're going to need to bring to the table to help them if we think they can. But then when a problem emerges in the work, we have a debriefing meeting immediately afterward. And I've got two of the most experienced divorce mental health professionals in all of the world there to teach me what I didn't get was happening at that meeting. There's a financial neutral there who can have creative inspirations about a different way to shape the conversation at the next meeting that might help avoid the pitfall that we fell into because of paranoia or anxiety on the parts of the client that I never would have expected would be part of the role of the financial neutral. It happens more often than I would have ever envisioned that a conversation that I might have imagined my client having with Nancy, the coach, instead happens in the office of the financial neutral. For some reason, who knows, that person formed rapport with the financial professional as the one person on the team that she was willing to talk to. And in one very difficult case I had, I don't think, now maybe you were on that one. I don't know, I think not. It was the financial neutral who found out that my client, who was a very high-powered surgeon, that's unusual for a woman, she was a very accomplished professional. It was the financial neutral who found out that she was so depressed that most of her thinking brain was not available to her, and that she had not understood one single word of the meeting she had just had with me about stock options. She would never have told me that, because with me, she was struggling to maintain her professional facade. It was all she had left under the circumstances. Turns out she was suicidal. Again, it was the financial neutral who found this out. When we have all of these different lenses and perspectives, the clients are empowered and invited to tell their story different ways. And we get so much more information, and we learn so much from one another what to do with that information. Any more on that, Nancy?
Well, I don't want to leave out the most important person on our team, the child specialist.
Yes, let's go right there.
Because the child specialist, and I'd like to talk about this case and what the child specialist did, but the child specialist is there not to give recommendations, but to really give the children a voice. So in this case, they were adult children, and we often forget adult children. They are severely impacted by parents' divorce. And they're often the ones who say, oh, fine, it's my parents. It doesn't bother me. I'm in my own relationship, or I'm in school. But it impacts them deeply. And in this case, the father was very estranged from his children. And we know someone who is very good at working with adult children. So the father and the coach, I met with him, and we call it the kid coach when it's an adult kid coach, when it's an older child. And they reconnected in ways that they never had before. And part of his goal coming in was to be able to have that connection with his children. So this really gave him a sense of meaning and purpose, and validated that he'd chosen the right process, because he could finally talk to, we met with three of the children, and each session they said things to him they never would have before. In one session, his daughter said to him, Dad, your drinking is really putting space between us. I can't talk to you. I'm worried about you. And this is a hard thing for a child specialist to tell a parent, but in this case, the adult child could. And about 2 months later, he informed me he was no longer drinking. And this also made a difference in our case, because he was a different person, wasn't he, Pauline?
Yeah. He would consistently, before this event happened with the adult child specialist intervention, in meetings, something would trigger him, a flush would come up, and he would be unable to participate effectively for the rest of the meeting.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know, I don't know if you knew, but it was because he was drunk. We just didn't know. He was a high functioning alcoholic. He was able to be a medical school professor at a top medical school, but drunk most of the time. His kids knew, his wife knew. Who was going to tell us? Not him. But he cared so much about the children, about his impaired relationship with them, that altered not only the whole family system, but the whole collaborative team system, that intervention. So it's an example of the richness of possibilities for, we define the job not as getting an agreement, but as helping this family with whatever services they need to get through the negotiating process and back into a functional life in 2 homes instead of 1, whether the kids are minors or whether they're adults. Looking at the child specialist in terms of minor children, I am always fascinated by negotiating theory, formal negotiating theory. And one of the basic principles of modern negotiations, whether it's in mediation or in collaboration, is that if you want a successful negotiation, every stakeholder has to be at the table and has to be facilitated to be able to express their needs and concerns fully, because otherwise you can't get to a deep and durable resolution. Well, if you've got minor children, we know from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, they are stakeholders in a divorce because it's a legal proceeding that affects their lives. Well, how does their voice get heard? In most countries that have signed the United Nations Convention, actually every country in the world except for ours, the United States, has signed it. The way that most countries meet that human right is by providing either a lawyer for the child or a conversation in the judge's chambers where the judge speaks to the child. And I don't know which one is more terrifying for a child, but I got to tell you, I do not think any of that meets the human needs of the stakeholder who happens to be a child. What I believe to be true is that the collaborative team process is the very first divorce process that does meet that human right of children through the child specialist role, because the child specialist role has nothing to do with the parents. No engagement with trying to negotiate solutions. When somebody tries to negotiate a solution about parenting conflicts, about how to parent the children, what we know is each parent, deep and genuinely in their heart of hearts, believes that they are holding the stake for the child, that they and only they, not the spouse, understands what the child's needs are at the table. And what we know as conflict resolution professionals is that neither one of them can articulate the child's perspective and the child's stake. The child specialist does that at the table with the coaches, usually in a coaching meeting, might say something like, the example I use is for a 9-year-old boy who has met with the child specialist. Johnny has given me permission here in this coaching session to tell you with your coaches that he's going to quit the football team because both of you are coming to the games with your new partners or your new love interests, and you're glaring at one another and you're arguing with one another, and he's so humiliated that he can't stand it. And so he intends to quit the team. Goodbye. And the child specialist leaves. And the coaches then help the parents process this. One thing that happens is that the football issue gets dealt with, but the bigger thing that happens is the parents are brought to understand that neither one of them knows what's going on with their child, that only the child knows. And that if they want their child to come out of this with health, they have to stop thinking that they know the answers and they have to start listening. And in my experience, I have never had a collaborative case in which there was an actual negotiating battle about a parenting plan because of the child specialist role. If we have only one mental health professional on the team, that person has to do it all and becomes a mediator. And it doesn't work this way. This is the most powerful aspect of collaborative team practice that I know of, and it's brilliant. More to say, Nancy?
I think a lot of parents, when you try to tell them about the child specialist will say, we know our children. Just what you're saying, Pauline. It's like, please don't tell us. No specialist, no expert can tell us. And we actually agree with that. We say that's true. But think about if you're a child, if you're your child, that 9-year-old, why isn't he saying anything? Well, he's afraid he's going to hurt your feelings if he says anything, and he doesn't even know what the rules are anymore. Or he's afraid that he'll cause more problems, that whatever he says, he may tell mom, I want to quit the football team, and then mom and dad will argue about it. Or he may be integrating this inside, so he's afraid to say anything at all because he's afraid that he'll cause more of a problem for him and make it worse. Children don't know, they're confused. So I just have a brief thing that I remember as you're talking. I used to have a 2-story building, and the teenagers would walk down the stairs after seeing the kid coach, the child specialist. And one day one walked down and he's got his fist raised and he says, thank goodness somebody finally listened to me. And it was so telling because that's what we wanted for the kids. Somebody's listening and then taking those words to their parents in a way they can hear. The coaches meet ahead of time and we strategize this. How is this going to be delivered? How are we going to have the parents hear it? It's very powerful.
There's yet another aspect to it. This is so rich and complex once you start to delve into the potentialities. Many, you wouldn't know it to hear us talk today, but many of my cases, at least in past years, have been with very high functioning couples who actually are, they're both very accepting of the need to divorce, maybe didn't equally want it, but it's real, it's happening. They're engaging with it realistically. They're considerate. Many of my clients have plenty of resources, so there are money issues, but they aren't survival issues. Usually there's generosity involved in cases like that. But one thing that happens in my experience, it's happened more than a few times, is that couples like that also may have high privacy needs and privacy agreements with one another that can lead to a kind of implicit collusion about the children. And what I mean by that is this. In one such case that I handled many years ago, my client, the husband, was only seeing the children, 2 teenage boys aged 15 and 17. He was seeing them only on weekends and only at the family residence with the wife at home. And he was content with this, and I couldn't understand why he was accepting it. But he did this for more than a year. And then finally, I don't know what the question was that I asked, but he told me first that his wife had all kinds of phobias and depression, many mental and physical health issues, that the role of mother was extremely important to her, and he didn't want to rock the boat because he wanted to get out of this marriage. And he thought that talking about the children would mean a longer divorce. And among her phobias, she didn't get on trains because there had been that explosion, the terrorist explosion in Spain right around that time. She wouldn't cross bridges because she was afraid of earthquakes. She wouldn't allow the boys, teenagers, older teenagers, to be near electrical power lines because she thought that they would get cancer. And there was a swimming pool at their house, and she thought they were going to drown if she wasn't there because the husband wasn't attentive enough. Now, this is serious psychopathology that I'm describing, and it's very bad for her and for the children. And my client was being selfish. He wanted out of this marriage and was not paying attention to the needs of the children. I could give you 5 other examples of cases where the children were being lost because of adult agreement that whatever they did, they were not going to talk about the children. And if you ask them about the children, they say, oh, they're fine. And the one bit of wisdom I would like to leave you with about that is if your client says, oh, the children are fine, They're not. Because no child is fine in a divorce. And if the parents aren't picking up what the issues are that their children are having, it's because nobody's listening. And that's what a child specialist does. I actually sound like a preacher, don't I, Nancy?
I think we both do at times. I know we're going to want them to have questions. So Pauline, are there maybe some last things we want to leave with them before we move on to questions?
Well, I think miraculously, we really sort of did cover everything that we wanted to talk about, at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Are there questions that anybody wants to ask us? Is someone going to translate questions for us?
Let's see, we have several.
Em Pauline e Nancy, temos algumas perguntas. Cláudia, se puder traduzir.
Okay, and please people ask more. Put them in the question and answer, the Q&A at the bottom, because that we have now 25 minutes or so to answer and talk more about any of the things that we discussed.
Temos uma primeira pergunta. Pauline disse ao longo da exposição que somos a mesma pessoa em todos os casos, mas há determinados casos que nos afetam em nossas questões subjetivas, crenças. Esses aspectos deveriam ser considerados na hora de formar uma equipe?
That's a very interesting question. That's a profound question. I'll try to answer it in a couple of different ways. The simplest answer, but I'm not going to settle for a simple answer, but the simplest answer is that is one of the things that a very skilled and trusting team does for one another, is that Nancy knows me very well. And if she sees me behaving strangely because I've become aligned with my client, or I've become alienated from my client, or for some reason the other lawyer is getting on my nerves, she's going to talk to me about it, and she's not going to hesitate, and she's going to take me aside and talk about it. Or if she didn't have such a good relationship, maybe with the lawyer who's in her triad, maybe it would come up in a debriefing session, but it does not escape notice. It's immediately part of the process management challenge of the team. So that's one level of answer. But another level of answer is all of us do have likes and dislikes and reactions and transferences and countertransferences, and they can catch us unaware no matter how skillful we are. And we're not trained as lawyers in the way that mental health professionals are. They're trained, they are observed as they work with clients, and they get direct feedback about that, but we're not. So how to become self-reflective and self-aware is part of the job description of a collaborative lawyer. We have to take all kinds of trainings and workshops that don't seem to be about the law or about divorce, but are about self-growth, about learning who we are and learning what our triggers are and learning to see them at an earlier point, just as we teach our clients to do in the coaching process. And for example, if a new client comes in and in that initial consultation, I'm feeling that this is somebody I'm reacting sort of negatively to, I mean, I still get blindsided, so I don't want to pretend that I've got this under control, but I will say that I'm a lot better at it now than I used to be because of having engaged in these kinds of work that I described. So I am able to notice it at an earlier point with any luck. And if I do have the good luck to notice it during the initial consultation, generally I will not take that client because it does not get better later. That first meeting is about as good as my relationship with that client is likely to be because the stresses increase as we move down the roadmap. So I probably would refer that client to somebody else who I think that that client would do better with. I might not be completely candid about the reason, or I might, depending on who it is. I know that, for example, I just don't do well with wealthy and highly entitled whining women. I have no patience for them, none at all. Maybe because I've worked hard professionally to get where I am, and there was nobody that I could whine to fix it. So I'm not very sympathetic. And so I do have colleagues, most of them male, who are more sympathetic with that kind of a personality, and I would send that client there. I do very well with the kind of men that Nancy was describing in our current case. I do well with neurotic men who really need a strong mother figure to just take them by the shoulders and shake them and say, look, you can't do that here. That's not how we do it. So we all have our preferences. It's good to learn them and work with them rather than against them. Other questions?
Temos sim. Como vocês veem o crescimento das práticas colaborativas em outras áreas, além da familiar, no societário, enfim, sucessões, em outras áreas? Empresarial, civil.
I'll give that one to Nancy.
So I am in process of trying to grow the collaborative trusts and estates movement. And we've had about 4 trainings, and there's more and more interest. Why? Because it's families. It's probably, you mentioned business, so family-owned businesses. So when it's family, it seems to be an easier fit, and people understand it, and it fits a little easier under our umbrella at the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, because we are all family. So it is very different, but I have had calls from all over our country. Last year at ICP, we had a meetup where Alan Nobler and I found that there was interest. We had some Brazilians there. We had people from Italy. We had people all over the world wanting to know about collaborative trusts and estates. And so much of it is the same. We work on teams, and so much of it is different. But it's the same concept that we can make a difference at an individual level, at a family level. And that translates ultimately to the culture we live in. So we're seeing this as very close, very aligned, and very successful. The cases are quite amazing, and they're very successful.
So I'm going to add a somewhat skeptical note to that. If anybody can make it happen, I think that Nancy and her colleagues can make it happen. The quality of the training and the commitment is exceptionally high, and you've been doing great work with it. I do want to say, just as a caution about how much energy you put into it, that I do think the first business of any community that's launching collaboration is to develop incredibly strong skills in the divorce realm. That is always going to be the bread and butter of the collaborative movement. And the reason why I say it the way I do is that for the first probably 15 years of its existence, IACP devoted tremendous financial and human resources to trying to develop collaboration in the probate, trust, and estate field that Nancy is working in, and also in the business and commercial dispute area. And in each of those areas, there's a very logical reason why it should succeed. And we were very convinced that it should succeed. And there was for many years an international phone bridge of lawyers, particularly, who were interested in developing these areas. They met, they shared ideas, they shared resources. But in 2016, when I did the 3rd edition of my book that I wrote for the ABA, I was updating the chapter on collaboration in areas outside of divorce. And I put out the word on the collaborative listserv and contacted everyone I knew who was working in this area and asked them to tell me about the actual cases that they had done, not the trainings, but the cases. And not one person could give me a genuine collaborative case after 16 years of energy trying to make it so. So I've come personally to believe that there are forces within a divorce process specifically that cause people to be receptive to collaboration that don't, despite our analysis, don't in fact exist in these other areas. And if the professionals work really hard at it, they may be able to develop some cases, but I will be surprised if it takes off. And I don't mean to sound like a cynic, but that's the truth of it from my perspective.
No, you're very right. It's the point I make all the time, is that divorce is an event. It's an impending event that's going to happen. Talking about money, talking about death, nobody wants to do that. Right. And so it really is a select group, and yet we are getting cases now. We have some active cases, but mainly in the planning, not in postmortem, after death. Planning is where I see the collaborative movement can have its impact and is the easiest, best fit.
I completely agree. And really, it's the difference between conflict resolution side, which is what collaborative divorce is. It's a conflict resolution model. And it just is not, I don't think, ever going to gain traction in other fields. But on the transactional side, on the planning side, Nancy's working in planning inheritance and business succession plans. You know, if there's a family business, it's very receptive to the kinds of conversations that we've learned to do and the kind of structure that we've learned in collaboration. Also, prenuptial agreements, premarital agreements. A lot, I mean, anytime that you have somebody come to you asking for a premarital agreement, you should be proposing collaboration as the most civilized way to do it. And in the agreement itself, you should be building in collaborative divorce as the process that would be used if the marriage ends. Also, in business world, there's a movement called conscious contracting, which is basically collaborative practice, but without all of the experience and skill that we have in process management. And I've often thought that making an alliance with the conscious contracting movement would be a very natural thing for people who are in the business and commercial area, but interested in collaboration. But I fear that it will be a lot of energy for very little results if you think that it's conflict resolution that's going to happen in those other areas. Other questions?
Sim, temos uma pergunta. Doutoras Pauline e Nancy, como vocês gerenciam o ritmo de trabalho da equipe colaborativa? Por exemplo, como lidar quando não há retorno e o ritmo se torna muito lento?
Who wants to begin? Nancy, you want to start?
So I think thank you for the question. It's a very good question, because I think, first of all, I do think we go much faster than the court systems, the way they're operating now, but people don't have that frame of reference. So the client is going to feel like there's always going to be one likely that wants it to go faster and one that wants it to go slower, isn't quite ready. So the coaches actively talk about it. It's a conversation. If one of the clients is frustrated, or both are frustrated at the pace, then I think several things happen. First, we find out what's underneath all of that. Is it the clients? Is it the team? Is there something happening that could be happening? For example, when the clients we're working with now, we would have a team meeting and maybe we couldn't get together as a team because of vacations or who knows, COVID, whatever. So we would have them work with the financial. There's always They could work with the coaches. So we try to consciously plan so that the clients have the experience of they're doing something, they're involved, there's something for them to do. If it's an emotional issue, and one of the clients, I mean, a case I'm on right now, the wife is very dependent and very frightened, has not been working for many years. And I see her, I'm not her coach, but I see her coach taking the time. So the coach is working with her to build her confidence. And at the same time, I'm working with her husband to say, this is going to help you. It may be slow, it may feel very slow, and you may get frustrated. So I want to hear when it does. But watch how she changes and think how that may benefit you, because she's going to be more independent. You're going to be less responsible for her. So there may be 1,000 reasons why there's a perception or an actual slowing of the case. The case may need to be slowed down. We have deliberately slowed down cases because the clients weren't integrating. They weren't quite ready to work with us. And then we would have them work with a coach, or we might have them have coaches meetings to get them ready, because it's an emotional issue that's slowing the process, not a pragmatic one.
I completely agree with that. And I would add that this is a very common dynamic that Nancy started out with in her comments, that the person who is leaving the long marriage has been working on that thought privately, secretly, probably for quite a while before coming up with the courage to say, we're getting a divorce. This is news to the other spouse. Often it's a homemaker who's been, you know, the wife, the parent, the homemaker for many years, and thought that she would spend her life in this marriage. And suddenly, honey, it's over. That person is incapable of the complex thinking required for intelligent negotiations, just not capable of it until, usually it's she, has had time to recover from the shock of the end of the marriage. Whereas usually he, not always, but usually he, his position is, what is there to talk about? Why aren't we just getting it done? All there is a house and a pension plan. What's the big deal? And for him, there's no big deal. When I'm representing the husband in that situation, I have exactly that conversation. As soon as I hear it, and I will hear it somewhere in the initial consultation, maybe he'll say, I've been trying to get her to go to a divorce lawyer for months, but she just won't, something like that. And I'm going to say, how long has she known about the divorce? How long have you been planning the divorce? How do you think it hit her to hear that the marriage was ending? Let me tell you how the brain works when somebody is deeply upset. Let me tell you about how evolution has made it necessary for our thinking brains to disengage when a threat happens, and that's what's happening with your spouse. So let me tell you what happens when you try to push a person like that faster than they can go. Do you know what happens? And I would ask the question, and my client would say, no, what happens? And I would say, your wife will terminate the collaborative process and she will find a lawyer to go to court and protect her from you. How long do you think that's going to take? And how much do you think that's going to cost? Because that's exactly what will happen if you push this faster than it can go. And I might use the metaphor of that children's game. I'm sure you have it in Brazil. It's everywhere. You know, we call it a three-legged race or a sack race, where children have a big bag and they each put one foot in the bag and they run a race against another pair of kids who have a foot in the bag. And what you learn very quickly as a child is the fastest person does not win the race. The fastest person falls flat on their face. And I basically use these as process anchors right from the beginning. When your client tells you about a fear like that, it's a gift at the front end of the case, because you can inoculate them against the effects of that thought form by asking them systematically to follow you through with what will happen in each of the processes if they think that they can do something about pushing a slow person to go faster. I think we may be out of time.
I think we're just right there now.
Sim, pedimos desculpas que não conseguimos cobrir todas as perguntas aqui no chat. A gente pode fazer um esforço de reportagem nós para tentar aqui futuramente debater isso no nosso GE, mas acho melhor para a gente cuidar do tempo, a gente encerrar por aqui. Olivia?
Sim. E antes da gente terminar, a gente tem uma surpresa para vocês. A gente pede que, enfim, a gente não pode ver todo mundo, mas quem está assistindo a gente, que venham para um brinde, uma tradição nossa, né, da Tânia, no Mediare, nos eventos do Mediare, e nossa também, da Pauline, do IDPC. Então, vamos fazer um brinde pelos 10 anos. Eu quero convidar o Pedro Miranda para entrar aqui agora. Pedro Miranda, ele é músico, compositor, ator, cantor, e é uma figura importante aqui do movimento artístico aqui da cena carioca, do Rio de Janeiro, do Brasil, meu amigo de infância, marido da Bel. Então, a gente vai fazer um brinde agora pelos 10 anos do Grupo de Estudos do Mediário, de trabalho com o Pedro Miranda. Obrigada, Pedro. Vamos lá,
Obrigado,
gente.
Olivia. Obrigado, Bel. Obrigado a todos os participantes pelo convite. É um prazer estar aqui nesse evento que está pensando um direito mais humano e ajudando a disseminar a cultura de paz no mundo. Então, um prazer imenso. Vou de Tom Zé, que é um tropicalista que faz a gente pensar um pouquinho. Vocês estão me ouvindo bem?
Perfeitamente. Seja muito bem-vindo.
Estou bem de baixo, obrigado. Estou bem de baixo para poder subir. Estou bem de cima para poder cair. Estou dividindo para poder sobrar. Desperdiçando para poder faltar. Devagarinho para poder caber. Bem de leve para não perdoar. Estou estudando para saber ignorar. Eu estou aqui comendo para vomitar. Eu estou te explicando para te confundir. Estou te confundindo para te esclarecer. Estou iluminado para poder cegar. Estou ficando cego para poder guiar. Eu estou te explicando para te confundir. Estou te confundindo para te esclarecer. Eu estou iluminado para poder cegar. Estou ficando cego para poder guiar. Suavemente para poder rasgar. Olho fechado para te ver melhor. Com alegria para poder chorar. Desesperado para ter paciência. Carinhoso para poder ferir. Lentamente para não atrasar. Atrás da vida para poder morrer. Eu tô me despedindo para poder voltar. Eu tô te explicando para te confundir. Tô te confundindo para te esclarecer. Tô iluminado para poder cegar. Tô ficando cego para poder guiar. Eu tô te explicando para te confundir. Tô te confundindo para te esclarecer. Tô iluminado para poder cegar. Tô ficando cego para poder guiar. Suavemente para poder rasgar. Olho fechado para te ver melhor. Com alegria para poder chorar. Desesperado para ter paciência. Carinhoso para poder ferir. Lentamente para não atrasar. Atrás da vida para poder morrer. Eu tô me despedindo para poder voltar. Eu tô te explicando para te confundir. Tô te confundindo para te esclarecer. Tô iluminado para poder cegar. Tô ficando cego para poder guiar. Tô te explicando para te confundir. Eu tô te confundindo para te esclarecer. Tô iluminado para poder cegar. Tô ficando cego para poder guiar. Eu tô te explicando para te confundir. Eu tô te confundindo para te esclarecer, tô iluminado para poder cegar, tô ficando cego para poder guiar. Eu tô te explicando para te confundir, eu tô te confundindo para te esclarecer, tô iluminado para poder cegar, tô ficando cego para poder guiar. Viva!
Viva! Bravo! Obrigada, Pedro. Gente,
Obrigado. Eu que agradeço, um prazer. Parabéns pelo encontro. Contem comigo sempre que quiserem.
obrigada, Pedro. Obrigada, gente. Pauline, Nancy, Tânia, Mediari, Vitória, Cláudia, parabéns. Obrigada para todo mundo que esteve aqui com a gente. Um dia de festa. Que venham os próximos 10 anos, os próximos 20 anos. Estamos preparados. Boa noite. Tânia, você está muda.
Good night to everybody. And thank you so much for letting us be with you. It was delightful.
Thank you. Thank you. See you soon. Obrigada a todos. Muito obrigada. Boa noite. Boa noite.
Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Obrigada, Paulinha.
Good night.
Obrigada, Nancy. Obrigada, Pedro.
Obrigada,
Obrigada.
Pedro. Querido.
Obrigada.
Valeu, gente. Estou saindo.